Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Pazza Podcast. My name is Travis. We are back with another episode after a week off of the Calcio Unheralded Legends little segment that we do, kind of detailing, some players from the 2000s, 2000 teens of Serie A that maybe were not what you'd consider superstars, but in my opinion, still had an impact and were players that impacted me and got me to become the Calcio fan I am today. And it really set the foundation for me as far as what drew me to Serie A and Calcio heritage in itself. So before we get started, guys, want to mention again stickers. I still have some. If you guys want any stickers, comment below or send me an email. Also, make sure you please like, subscribe, whatever, share, do whatever you have to do. Just show me some love. Comment if you want to, and maybe what you remember about Bresciano, the guy we are doing today, as far as what impact he had or what impact that era maybe of Calcio had on you. So let's dive in. Like I said, today we are going to do the Australian, despite what his name sounds like, the Australian midfielder, Mark Bresciano. Not Marco. He's made that clear. It's Mark Bresciano. It's funny, in an interview I was reading, he said, in Australia, they call me Marco Bresciano. In Italy, I'm known as Mark Bresciano. Make that make sense. So a little bit of humor to start off. He was born, though, to Italian ancestry. His father was born in the Viggiano province of the Basilicata region of southern Italy. And he was also born to a Croatian mother. She is from the Antonci region of Croatia. So he does have that Italian ancestry, with his father being Italian, but he was born in Melbourne, Australia on the 11th of February, 1980. Melbourne is the second biggest city in Australia, only behind Sydney, and it's the capital of the Victoria state of Australia. His youth career, he spent his early youth career at club Bulleen Lions before moving to, which is now a defunct club. It's not non-existent club Carlton. He spent 2 seasons at Carlton alongside a similar player as far as ancestry being Italian and being Australian, Vincenzo Grella or Vince Grella. And they kind of, you'll see throughout the story, their careers kind of mirror each other for a decent part of both of their careers. He would stay 2 seasons at Carlton. This would earn him his move abroad to Italy for Serie A club, or Serie B club at the time, Empoli. The summer of '99, Bresciano moved to Empoli and alongside Vincenzo Grella. So this was the first, or I guess the second, if you consider Carlton, of a couple of moves where we'll see them be on the same team. Under manager of Empoli at the time, Silvio Baldani, Empoli finished ninth in his first season of Serie B. He would play alongside, like I said, Grella, center back Dario Dianelli, winger Marco Macchioni, Simone Del Nero, and then the reason for the Italian kit today, he would also play alongside at Empoli, probably one of the biggest cult legend, whatever you want to call him, in Serie A of the 2000s. Antonio Di Natale was on this Empoli side. So pretty cool little jersey I've had. I've had this for a while. I think this is 2010. Not a good campaign for the Italian national team, 2010 World Cup. This is actually a size small. I'm surprised it still fits me. As you can see, don't make fun of the man tits that are poking out, but it's a cool jersey. Antonio Di Natale, legend. But yeah, he was on that Empoli side alongside Bresciano. He would stay at Empoli for 3 seasons, Bresciano. He'd make 80 appearances and score 12 goals from midfield, eventually leading and helping Empoli gain promotion in Serie A his last season, the 01-02 season. They would finish fourth in Serie B, and they would gain promotion to Serie A. On this team, Grella, again, was on there. So was Di Natale. They also had Francesco Lodi was on that squad, Tommaso Rocchi, and Francesco Tavano. So Massimo Maccaroni, who's one also that we have done one of these little profile pieces on. If you want to listen, I'll see if I can provide a link in the bio for that. Check out Big Mac, Massimo Maccaroni. But The success for Empoli, winning that relegation, earned Mark Bresciano a move, a €7 million transfer to Parma in the summer of 2002. At the time, this was the highest paid fee for a player, an Australian-born player in the world, €7 million. Um, I'm sure I probably should have looked into it, but I'm sure Tim Cahill probably broke that record as he's probably the most famous Australian-born player of all time. But kind of cool. Bresciano in the '02 season or summer held the Australian-born record for the highest transfer fee at that time. At Parma, this necessarily, I wouldn't say is where I remember Bresciano, but it's kind of the foundation of what made him a good Serie A legend at the time was these few seasons at Parma under manager Cesare Brandelli beginning. He would have pretty good success. They would finish back-to-back fifth-place finishes in his first couple seasons at Parma. He played alongside players such as Sebastian Frey, who's a goalkeeper, which you will probably see next week as our Calcio Unheralded Legends little profile. Current Milan Futuro coach Daniele Bernera. Marco Marchiani was on that team. Paolo Cannavaro, Matteo Brighi. This was, I would say, kind of post that Parma legendary late 90s era that we all know and love with some crazy good players. They had just moved on from Buffon at that point as well. Lilian Thuram was no longer on the squad, but they still had some pretty big legends. Alberto Gilardino was on the team. Adrian Mutu, the Romanian-born player who is also, I guess, a pretty big Calcio legend during this time. And then somebody that we all know, we all love, we all dream about, one of the players that got everybody into football that are around my age, 30, 31. Adriano was on loan at Parma during this time. So still had the legends, maybe not as big as that, but Bresciano was on this team with Parma, back-to-back fifth-place finishes, like I said. And really, Parma at this time was still fighting for stuff. It's not the Parma we know today. It's the Parma of, being competitive and everything like that. Two back-to-back fifth-place finishes, '02-'03 and '03-'04 season. That '03-'04 season, Bresciano would score 8 goals, being one of his best seasons in top-flight football. That's just with 33 appearances. But this era of Parma, like I'd said, was coming to an end due to monetary issues, financial difficulties. They were being forced, it seemed like every season, being forced to sell top players. Although they were able to bring in younger, decent players, they were having to sell them a couple years later just to try and get by and stay in top flight Italian football. So unfortunately, their performances would slip. They would sell Gilardino and Sebastian Frey in the summer of '04. And that next season, it would lead to a 17th place finish, barely avoiding relegation. It was the first season that Serie A moved to a 20-team league, so they were able to avoid relegation. But yeah, it was not a good time for Parma. Although the next season, the '05-'06 season, Bresciano would score another 8 goals in the season, and they would make the jump up to finish 10th in the league, so significantly higher than 17th. But they would, I guess they would finish 10th in the season, and then Calciopoli got them to finish 7th due to different point deductions and everything from other clubs. But they still weren't at the height of the previous 6 or 7 seasons. It wasn't a Parma of the late 90s, very early 2000s that we had known before. That would be Bresciano's last season. He would end up making 123 appearances for the club with 19 goals. I would say somewhat successful after 2 fifth-place finishes and everything. But it still wasn't, like I said, the Parma that we've known before. This would earn him a move to Palermo at this time. Him and Fabio Simplicio, who was at Parma as well, would move to Palermo that season. Under another Calcio Unheralded legend piece, one of my favorite ones that we've done so far, Maurizio Zamparini was the president. crazy lunatic and crazy nut of a guy. I will link that one below too for people if you want to look at some stories and hear some sound bites from Zamparini. He's a really huge character and kind of one of those people that you can just say this is what makes Serie A and so different from other leagues around the world. But his move to Palermo is kind of where I found Bresciano and where I really remember his time in Serie A. He was a midfielder that was very obvious when he was on the pitch with the bald head. Very combative in the midfield. He could play pretty much anywhere. He would pop up anywhere. Kind of like Davide Biondini that we've talked about before at Cagliari at the time. He wasn't great at any one thing, but he was really good at everything. He, I guess, he did have a good set piece. He was a what you consider for Australia a set piece specialist. He could whip a ball in, could test the goalkeeper from 20, 25 yards out. But he was more known for being that rock in the midfield, that solid player that you knew consistently week in and week out what you were going to get from Bresciano. And, you know, for a manager, any manager, you want that type of player. Look at Inter now with Mkhitaryan. Wouldn't say he can do the things that Çalhanoğlu Barella does, but that consistency, knowing what you're going to get week in and week out, is kind of what forces managers to play players like that. So he would make that move in July of 2006 to Palermo. It was a 2.5 million euro move, so a little less than what his move to Palermo was. He was only 26 at the time, so I think simply the reason for the reduction of fee was because Parma was needing money. All these teams, you don't have a leg to negotiate on whenever everyone knows you're selling players to try and recoup money. So he joined Palermo side with Christian Zaccardo, who was on the 06 World Cup squad, Mattia Cassani, Marco Pisano, Andrea Barzali, who also was on the World Cup squad, Eugenio Corini, Fabio Simplicio, like I had mentioned earlier, and then Amari, the Brazilian-born Italian striker who would go on to play for Juve. He was on the squad too. Edison Cavani would come in that winter after Amari picked up a injury. And this Palermo side is kind of Mikuli was on this side. These were the sides, the squads, when people really fantasize and daydream about these cult Serie A teams, it's these Palermo squads of the late 2000s. And Bresciano was an integral figure of these squads. Like I said, he's someone you would always notice because the bald head and just the consistency week in and week out that he displayed for Palermo. He would go on to score 6 goals in the league in his first season, and then they would finish 5th place. The crazy thing about that season is that was the first time Palermo had ever been on top of the table in September. Still early in the season. It was match day 3. They were, for the first time in the history of Palermo, top of Serie A. So kind of cool. Bresciano was on the squad for that. But yeah, this is kind of the bulk of Bresciano's success, or where you get to know Bresciano for me is at Palermo. Some crazy things happened. Catania, the southern Italian big derby match, Palermo and Catania. It's huge derby every season. February 2nd, 2007, violence broke out outside of the stadium, leading to authorities using tear gas everywhere. And that tear gas would leak into the stadium, and they had to suspend and postpone the match for 30 minutes. There's a quote with Bresciano where he would pretty much said it's the scariest moment of his playing career. That you were feeling the tear gas on the pitch and had to go to the locker room due to the violence outside. Unfortunately, the violence continued after the match, and it led to an officer of the law, Filippo Raciti, ended up being killed after the match as well. Kind of a knock and a blight on Italian top flight football during the time was this huge match, huge scandal, maybe not scandal, but huge, conflict between Catania and Palermo. It's a huge derby, and it just is a blight and unfortunate that someone had to lose their life regardless if it's a person of the law or just a regular person. Anytime somebody loses their life at a football match, it's a tragedy. But yeah, he would stay at Palermo for 4 seasons. He'd make 107 appearances, score 12 goals. And that's kind of where, you know, the bulk of what I know Bresciano from is that time at Palermo. Like I said, combative, very easily recognizable, pops up and contributes, maybe not on the stat sheet, but his consistency is something you can't put on stats. He would stay there until the 2010 2011 season. He would move to Lazio on a free during this time. It would be a time where he was more so a rotational figure and not a starter at Lazio. They would have two fifth place finishes, or sorry, he would only do one season at Lazio. He would only make 20 appearances, wouldn't have a goal that season. Lazio would finish fifth place in the league, but Bresciano at that time was just a rotational player. He was behind another person that we have done, an Unheralded Legend, Piece 4, Christian Ledesma. I'll link that one below too, potentially, for you guys to listen to. Ledesma was a great player during that time. But it really sucks because he's only 30 years old at this point. Still, I wouldn't say he's past his prime, but he was being used as a rotational figure. And this would lead for in the summer of 2011, after just one season at Lazio, Bresciano would move for free to Al Nassr, who we all know now is the club that Cristiano Ronaldo plays for. Maybe not as big in 2011. He would stay there for a season and then in 2012 move to Qatari side Al Gharafa. And this would be considered a breach of his contract with Al Nassr. I think he had signed a 2-year deal with Al Nassr and Al Gharafa. Couldn't really find what the details were as to why he was able to make the move. But this would lead to him being suspended for 4 months due to breach of contract and fined 1.4 million euros, which is kind of crazy. But that would be pretty much the end of his career. Something of note in the 08 season, after a couple of impressive seasons with Palermo and success with the Socceroos of Australia, he was supposed to move to Manchester City. And like we've said a couple of times, somehow Manchester City always pops up in these Calcio Unheralded Legends episode. This is not the Manchester City we know today. This was the Manchester City getting some funding to try and become what we know Manchester City of today. Weren't making great signings a lot of the time, spending a lot of money on players with just a name and not necessarily fitting a system or anything like that. Joe, Roque Santa Cruz, Robinho, a lot of these names pop out as players who were big names, but didn't fit either a Premier League system or the system that Man City had at the time. Bresciano was supposed to move to Man City. In fact, he had actually gone over there and trained a few times with Manchester City under Sven Gordon Eriksson. But apparently, Manchester City wanted to delay payment to Palermo, which, if we know anything about Zamparini, if it's not on his terms, it's not going to happen. He canceled the deal. Bresciano had to come back to Palermo and finish out his contract for the next 2 seasons. Bresciano is a player that is known, like I said, first time at Palermo in summary. And then I think you would say his time with the Socceroos of Australia. He played on that 06 World Cup team that, if anyone remembers and is an Azzurri fan, that is the World Cup that Italy won, obviously. And probably one of the tougher games they had was against Australia in the round of 16, which Bresciano played. He also drew the red card that Materazzi got, was Bresciano. It's a game that was marred by controversy. Fabio Grosso's dive, if you will, leading to a penalty in the extra time, which Totti buried, leading to be a 1-0 victory for Italy, who would eventually go on and win the whole damn thing. Bresciano would make all 4 appearances in the World Cup for all 4 games that Australia played. He would start the first match, come on as a sub the next 2, and then in that round of 16 game start. He has made 84 appearances with Australia and 13 goals. A goal he scored in 2007. The coach at the time for Australia said that this is the greatest goal in Australian history. So he had that going for him. Again, probably usurped now by something Tim Cahill had done. But he also won the AFC Asian Cup trophy with Australia in 2015. So pretty successful international career for Australia. I think this was a time where Australia was transitioning from either about to move to the Oceania qualifying group or vice versa, moving out of it. I think they're in Oceania now. So I think they were in the Asia Cup qualifying group. I could be wrong. Somebody comment and let me know for sure. But yeah, very important to Australia during this time as well. And then one thing, last thing of note, we'll talk about it. He was known for a celebration known as the Spartacus celebration, where essentially he would just stand and in a statuesque figure with his hands down his side and look off in the distance. And that was his celebration. Uh, Not something I really remember from, but it was something that I saw a couple of times on my research. So interesting stuff. But yeah, that's the end of Bresciano and his career. If you guys have anything else interesting you want to mention or anything like that, please comment below. He was definitely a important and diminutive figure in Serie A in the 2000s, in my opinion. Appreciate all the support, guys. Thanks for sticking around if you did listen to the whole episode. And we'll be back next week with another episode of the Calcio Unheralded Legends. Thanks. As always, Forza Inter.